In this video, I'm going to talk about 4 ways that my parents inadvertently set me up for athletic success. And by athletic, I'm not in the Olympics, but I am a very active adult. So I'll first give you a quick background on my childhood. Both my parents were amateur cyclocross athletes when I was a kid. Cyclocross is a niche sport, let's say. It's off-road cycle racing, mainly in a really muddy field with some sand pits and maybe some bridges. Now, actually, I think they've even introduced rock gardens. Back in the day, it was a load of people stood in a field in winter with their Ford Mondeo estates, watching others cycling around some red and white taped course. And my parents loved this. They were part of a cycling club and they would do time trials and road races in the summer, and then they would do cyclocross in the autumn and winter. And because they didn't want to stop that just because they had kids, my sister and I went along. This meant that we also raced, normally 15-minute races in the under 12 kind of category. And I didn't love cyclocross, I just went because I had to. This wasn't a sport for me and my sister, it was a sport for my parents, and we just went along and did it too. Now, when it came to any other kind of sporting endeavour, both my parents enjoyed swimming. They weren't competitive swimmers, they weren't masters swimmers or anything, they just liked swimming, so we often went to the swimming pool. Not super regularly, but I could swim. In fact, when I was 11 years old, I raced for my school, a very tiny little school. I raced in breaststroke, just in the normal kind of like small, not even county level, literally we just went and a load of other schools came to the pool and we raced. It was very much a non-event. Also in junior school, so we're talking like 10, 11 years old, I played a bit of netball. I wasn't very good, but I just liked the socks. And that was pretty much it for my sporting endeavours. Like PE, I was fine, but I didn't excel at anything. I wasn't particularly interested in a particular sport. I wasn't in a sports club or anything like that. I just did cyclocross races on the weekend in winter and sometimes went to the pool. As a teenager and a young adult in my 20s, I did pretty much no sport. I did some rock climbing at university, and then I spent a couple of years sailing, but not like dinghy sailing or anything athletic, like sailing on a cruising yacht, which is very non-athletic. And then it wasn't until 2018 when I started running and I started cycling much more, and then I started swimming, and then I started triathlon. So I haven't had a very sporty background at all. I've had an active background, but not a sporty one. And yet now I find myself about to race in the World Championship Super Sprint Triathlon as an age grouper. And I honestly put this down to how my parents treated me when I was a child. So if you want your kids to grow up to be active adults, this is my experience of how my parents managed that without really thinking about it and without enrolling me in any sports clubs. Firstly, the focus of sport and movement and activity wasn't on me as a child. They weren't signing me up for sports clubs, they weren't, standing at the sidelines watching me at games. Not that I did in games, but if I did, they weren't there. They didn't put me in that environment. It wasn't like, pick a sport and you're gonna do this twice a week. It wasn't like that at all. Instead, they did sport and took me along with them. This meant that everything was focused on them and what they wanted to achieve, and they brought me into that as an active participant, not as a spectator, and they weren't spectating at my events either. This meant that sport became a part of my life, that movement became a part of my life, not a particular focus or an event for just one person in the family. But mainly, what it showed me is that adults do activity, they do sport, they move their bodies, and they focus on that and they train for that. And this is what I feel often happens now, is that parents don't do any sport. Instead, they put so much of their effort on trying to provide everything for their kids that they completely neglect themselves, therefore not actually showing their children that sport and movement is an adult thing, it's a child thing that you do until you're a teenager and then you give it up. So throughout my childhood, I saw my mum in particular, like my dad did loads of sport as well, but it was a more common thing for men to do. But I saw my mum, who it was very unusual to see a woman racing cyclocross, doing road races, all those kinds of things back in the 90s. I saw her race and push herself so hard. In fact, I still see her do that now in her 60s. And in December of last year, she actually raced in the World Championships Masters Cyclocross, and that was a pretty cool thing for me to see, that my mother in her 60s is still racing now. So the first thing that I think really helped me become an active adult is seeing my parents be active adults, not being put necessarily in sports clubs and all the focus being on me as an active child. The second thing I think really helped me was that I did a wide range of sports. I didn't have a sport. My mum started running when I was in my, I think, very early teens, and I would occasionally go along with her and like, you know, go to like the Christmas running club run or do like a, not a park run back in those days, but like a 5K run or something. I didn't like it. I wasn't much of a runner, but I went along with her and just did it anyway. I also did a lot of cycling for reasons I'll talk about in a moment, but obviously I did cyclocross as well back then. I swam in PE, I did rounders. My friends and I would play a bit of tennis and rounders at the weekend. We were terrible. No, scratch that. I was terrible. I've always been really terrible with racket sports or like rounders. I love it though, but so I did that quite a lot, even though I was terrible at it. A wide range of sports means that you move your body in different ways and you learn to trust it in different movements. You're not just particularly good at one sport to the detriment of every other type of movement. That, I think, has given me the ability to see that I can probably try and do anything that I want to. If I decided to take up this sport or that sport, then why not? The third thing, and one of the most important things I think that my parents inadvertently taught me, is that I have a very good respect for my body's ability to build strength. And that is because we did so much activity and movement when I was a kid, just, you know, trying to keep up with them or something, that I learnt very quickly that my body can just do whatever I want it to. So we would go on walking holidays up mountains and in the hills in the UK, and we might go on like 13-mile walks, 14-mile walks in the Lake District sometimes, and I could do that as an 11-year-old. I wasn't really given a choice. I didn't think I was grumbling the whole time, although when it started to drizzle I probably was grumbling quite a lot, but instead like that was just what we did. We went walking up hills. So because I was always really working on like an adult's kind of like idea of a good hike, then I learned very quickly to trust my body and trust that it would get me to the end point, even when it started to get tired. This means now I have a huge faith in my strength and my ability to build strength. And finally, the main thing that my parents gave me to enable me to be a very active, sporty adult is that they put movement and activity into our life. Every part of our life as children was about movement, and not deliberately. So we very rarely drove anywhere when we were kids. We weren't given lifts places. We lived where everything was sort of in a 2-mile radius of where we lived. We lived in a kind of mid-sized town. So it had a rec centre, it had the schools that we needed to go to, you know, throughout, and it was on the edge of a national park. So my parents just basically refused to give us a lift anywhere. Like, it was just not a done thing at all. When we were very young children, we would all cycle everywhere. So we could cycle to the supermarket, we would cycle to the recreation centre to go swimming. That was over a mile away. We would cycle, you know, anywhere we wanted to. We would cycle into the national park and go cycling in the national park as well. Using our bikes was just a way to get from A to B. And yes, they did race them as well, and me and my sister did race bikes as well, but to a very small level. Mainly we just used bikes to get around. I needed to go to school every day, obviously. My secondary school was over a mile from my house, and I walked it every single day. Walked to school and walked back from school. I don't think once in my entire 5 years at that secondary school did I ever get a lift anywhere. Even in winter, even in the pissing rain. I walked every single day. As a teenager, again, didn't get lifts anywhere. I had my bike and I just cycled to all my friends' houses. I cycled anywhere I wanted to go. That was just the way I got around. That was how I could be independent, because my parents were not going to give me a lift and I was obviously too young to drive. In fact, that brings me on to when I was 17 and passed my driving test. I didn't get a car. For a start, I couldn't actually afford one, but mainly I didn't need one, because I could cycle absolutely everywhere. As I've mentioned, as a kid we went on walking and cycling holidays. We could cycle hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles in our 2-week summer holidays, and we would go to Lake District or Wales to go on walking holidays as well. So none of these things revolve around a particular sport, but movement and activity in sport were ingrained into my life. It meant that I wasn't going to go and do a sport somewhere necessarily. It was just that I was always active, always moving. And then when I got older, even to university and in my 20s, where I didn't really do that much actual sport, I was still moving constantly. I walked everywhere at university. I cycled everywhere. Like, that was how I moved. That was how I got around. And so when it came to 2018 and I decided to take up running after not having really done any sport at all for over a decade, It was very easy for me not to run, because it was very hard to run, but it was very easy for me to believe that I could run. It was very easy for me to believe that I could just begin this new sport because, well, I know what my body can do if I train it and do these things regularly. So it was kind of a no-brainer. I know that I can do anything that I want to. It's just a question of motivation, effort, and time available to me. You can do any of these sports. You can put yourself in those positions. You can get stronger. Your body can always get stronger. It's just a case of being empowered and motivated to get there. And that ultimately is what my parents gave me. They empowered me to take control of the movement of my body and go and make it stronger and go and do any sport that I wanted to do. They set me up for a life of movement and activity. And basically that's why I do triathlon today. That's why I can just, jump out of the car halfway home from work and run the rest of the way, because they have set me up to think that I can integrate sport and movement into any part of my life. So if you've got children or you're thinking about having children and you want to know how you can support them to be active people, active children, active adults, then potentially try some of these ways. Show them that you do sport and movement too. Take them along to the sport and movement things that you do in your life. Don't keep those things separate. Although I appreciate you probably want some time away from them sometimes. Let them try different things. It doesn't always have to cost money. Running, hiking, swimming sometimes can be very affordable, sometimes not. Cycling, if you've got bikes or can hire bikes, something like that. There are often free tennis courts or free sports clubs or free council run sessions for kids in different sports. Getting them to try a wide range of sports and movement and activity means that none of these things will be particularly unfamiliar to them later in life. I appreciate it's not always easy, but integrating movement and sport into your everyday life is a huge benefit to teaching kids that later on they can just do that too. They don't need to rely on a car or public transport to get everywhere necessarily. They might just be able to, power themselves there. I hope this was interesting and inspired you a little bit. Really, I just want you to know that taking time to do movement and sport for yourself as an adult, even if you have kids, is so powerful and you're actually doing them a huge favour. So prioritise your own sport and movement and they will follow. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.